Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, na mihi nui kia koutou. Can I say it's always disarming when the presentation begins with a photo of you before you were made the Minister of Finance. This job ages one somewhat. Can I say that it's a pleasure to be here, and so thank you for the invitation to address your conference. I'd like to acknowledge the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Council, Kirk Hope, for the work he does. And I'd also like to specifically acknowledge the hugely important role each of you in this room play in helping New Zealanders to increase their financial literacy, build financial security, and prepare for retirement. And I've noted with some interest the theme of your conference, Transforming for Tomorrow. And that is a theme that really speaks to me, because balancing the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow is an ever-present challenge for every finance minister. And some rise to that challenge better than others, and views will differ on who's risen well and who hasn't, and I won't name any names. But I had a conversation this morning, and I hesitated to share it with you for fear of being the cheesy one. But it impacted me, and I'm going to, which is when I left the house this morning in the very early hours and I went down to get my coffee before I caught the plane up here. As is her habit, my 9-year-old with her eagle ears heard that Mum was up and decided to nab her time with me one-on-one. And so she asked me, "Oh, Mum, you're getting up early today, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Auckland." She said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm going to talk to some very smart people who want to make sure New Zealanders have more money." That's how I summarised you all. And she said, "Oh, okay, so what will you say?" Now, as I tell you the rest of the story, I want you to understand that Gloria, my 9-year-old, is the youngest of 4. She has bright red hair, she's very tall. It is fair to say that she is feisty, cynical, and a little bit sassy. So when she asked me what I would say, I said, well, really what I want to talk about is how we can spend money today in a way that will ensure that we all have more in the future. And she rolled her eyes at me and she said, "Well, Mum, obviously you can't do both. You can't spend more today and then have more tomorrow." At which point I found myself embarking on a financial literacy lesson, which probably would have been better delivered by one of her teachers. But it went roughly like this: actually you can, because you see, money is very clever. It grows, but only if you put it in the right places. And I grasped for the analogy. And this is where I took a bad turn, because I reached for the analogy of a tree. And I said, money's a bit like growing a tree in the garden. If you plant it right and you work on it and you water it, the tree will grow more flowers and more leaves, and you'll be able to pick them in the future. At which point I had completely lost Gloria, who said to me, "Mum, I've heard you on the radio. There is no magic money tree." To which I said, I didn't say it was magic. I said it takes hard work. So with that to one side and magic money trees aside, my plan today is to give you a sincere overview of where New Zealand is economically now, and then to give you a sense of how I do think we grow for a more prosperous future, and how this government is addressing New Zealand's future challenges. And I'll also say a little bit about KiwiSaver, which I know is a subject that is top of mind for many of you. I'll start by meeting you where you all must be, and where certainly New Zealanders are, which is feeling that New Zealand has been in a very rough patch. High inflation for 3 years led to high interest rates, which in turn triggered a protracted downturn which has hit households and businesses alike. And late last year and early this year, there were promising signs. In the final quarter of last year, the economy grew 0.5% annualised to. In the first quarter of this year, it grew 0.8%, which was roughly double what my Treasury forecasters had told me to expect, and nearly the 3 times the rate of growth occurring in Australia at that time. Things were looking up. But then Liberation Day happened. Liberation Day. And the United States' decision to unilaterally impose additional tariffs on goods imported from virtually all of its trading partners dampened economic confidence globally, and I think particularly here in New Zealand, a small trade-exposed nation in which 1 in 4 jobs depend on trade. Households and businesses, which had started to spend, tucked their wallets away again. And consequently, the banks are now anticipating that there was a small contraction in the second quarter, and so when those GDP figures come out next week, that is what we expect to see. And that is the bad news. And everyone will have a different anecdote about how that's felt this last little while. But it is my job not to tell you how bad it is, but to give you the reasons why I believe there is good news. And I believe there is growing cause for optimism about the economic outlook for the remainder of this year, and most consequentially, for the next few years successively. So to give you a sense of the data in which I ground my optimism, retail sales figures actually surprised on the upside in the June quarter. They were better than forecasters had been expecting, with volumes growing on the previous quarter. Lower interest rates are now actually beginning to filter through the economy. It's important to note that about 40% of fixed mortgages are due to come up for repricing in the next few months. And as they do, people will find themselves with more money in their pockets. Absolutely, some of them will save it, and I'm sure you will be ensuring that they consider insurance products and KiwiSaver options. But much of that money will be spent, which will benefit businesses as well as households. Already, there is evidence of increased mortgage lending. Encouragingly, certainly from my perspective, when I think about the longer game that we are all in, first home buyers are coming back into the market in a big way. Their share of home purchases account for 27% of all purchases at the moment, well above their long-term average of 21 to 22%. At the same time, farmers and exporters are profiting from strong demand and export prices. We have pretty much the best terms of trade on goods that we have ever had, going back to the 1950s. And the impact of US tariffs has not been as disruptive as initially feared in terms of the future outlook for our economy. In fact, last night I was advised by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs official I was speaking with that they are still forecasting growth in goods trade to the US over the coming period. And the outlook for most export sectors does remain positive. So what does that all add up to? It means that after bumping along at the bottom of the economic cycle for way longer than anyone wanted, we can look forward to an economic upswing. Now, views will differ on when that will take place. Economists will make a range of judgments, but they universally concur that the conditions for a pickup in activity and demand are in place. Inflation's back in its box, interest rates are down, demand for New Zealand's exports is expected to remain high. Consumer confidence about the future has been upbeat for most of the year, and business confidence about the future is growing, albeit off a low base. So Treasury and the Reserve Bank are forecasting economic growth to strengthen, accelerating through this year to about 2.5% to 3% over the next 3 years. And that is a lot healthier than we have experienced for some time. And it means more jobs, more opportunities for our kids, and ultimately higher incomes. It's also worth noting, and I'll admit I took some pleasure in pointing this out to Treasurer Jim Chalmers in Australia last week, that Westpac has compared the prospects for the Australian and the New Zealand economies and concluded that over the next few years, it actually expects growth in New Zealand to outpace growth in Australia. So let me now turn to that future which you're focusing on at your conference, which I unfortunately described to Gloria as the conditions for planting the tree. You don't need me to tell you that the world is changing extraordinarily quickly. We now don't look to books for information. We use an AI tool, and it takes a few clicks on our phone. In fact, I could have asked AI to write me this speech, and there would be some who would have said it would have been better. So that is happening. Some of the rules which we have governed ourselves along internationally appear to be in flux. Conflict abounds. There's change. So what is the role of government amongst all of that change? Well, our government is of the view that we shouldn't try and tell you that we will anticipate the next big thing, that we can't tell you exactly what the right thing is to do with your money. Your choices will vary. But what we can do is create the conditions and the environment that allow New Zealanders to make choices that set themselves up for success. Some of you, I hope, this is not a pop quiz, but I hope that you will be familiar with the 5 key elements of this government's growth agenda. I won't go through them laboriously. Feel free to ask in the question section for that detail. I will appreciate it. But these are things that collectively I think New Zealanders can understand, and certainly the economic analysis supports, are very important to driving the productivity increases necessary to shift New Zealand onto a faster growth track, to make us a wealthier country in which each of us produces more for the hard hours that we work. And perhaps unusually for a finance minister, I'll start with my passion, which starts with how we grow our people, how we develop talent and use our education system to do that. Because we need to equip New Zealanders with the knowledge and skills they need to flourish in this daily changing world. And you will have seen that my colleague, Erica Stanford, has been doing a huge amount of work in this area, refocusing the education system on the basics of reading, writing and maths, stopping the building of barn-like classrooms, banning cell phones, very unpopular with my 15-year-old, putting more resources into learning support for kids with higher needs, and re-establishing meaningful qualifications. These things matter because for so long as we are complacent about the fact that around 1 in 5 kids have been leaving school without basic literacy and numeracy skills, we are signing ourselves up to a poorer future. And while we're at it, in this area of education, we're also putting compulsory financial literacy into our schools. And I know that you've all asked for that for many years. Yeah, give it a clap. It's a good one. And I tell you, there's a whole side industry going of young people developing tools to teach financial literacy in their schools too, which is awesome to see. The second theme for us is competitive business settings, because we need to make this a place in which it's easy to build things, grow things, make things, hire people. In a world that's competing for businesses, for capital, for talent, we need to make this an easy place to be entrepreneurial. And for too long, we believe that New Zealand has been held back by an overly cautious approach that has led to an unnecessary tangle of red tape. And we need to ensure that our rules and regulations foster competition and investment, innovation, and don't discourage it. And that encompasses everything from the Building Act, through the Health and Safety Act, through to our employment laws and beyond. Tax settings matter too. As a country, we need to attract capital, not scare it off. And that is why Investment Boost was one of the centrepieces of our budget. It incentivises businesses to invest in the tools, equipment and machinery necessary to lift productivity and gives them a tax benefit for doing so. The rules of doing business matter too. You probably know about the work my colleague Scott Simpson has been doing in Commerce and Consumer Affairs to rewire New Zealand's financial services regulation. His goal is to ensure consumer protection without stifling access to credit or stifling innovation. And the legislation to give effect to these changes is making its way through Parliament. Many of you will have submitted on it. Work is also underway more broadly to improve competition. And this is something that the OECD, the lauded global economists, has highlighted in its reports on New Zealand. To quote from their most recent report in 2024, they say, New Zealand's small and distant economy means large firms face fewer pressures to innovate and seek efficiencies while providing better services and lower prices to consumers. Ensuring competition policy is up to international standards is important for offsetting these handicaps. And so Scott Simpson and I will have more to say about broader competition reforms shortly, and you will have seen our ongoing work program in banking and energy and supermarkets and elsewhere. Now, none of this work will magically transform the economy overnight, but I sincerely think that getting our competition settings right is critical to encouraging businesses of the future, investment and innovation. Our third area of focus is promoting global trade and investment. Todd McClay, the Minister for Trade, and his officials are constantly travelling the world, hustling on New Zealand's behalf. And last year, that included a big focus on the Middle East, which has resulted in new trade agreements with the United Arab Emirates and the Gulf Cooperation Council. On its own, that UAE deal, which came into force just a couple of weeks ago, unlocks billions of dollars in new opportunities for Kiwi exporters across a broad range of industries. But trade isn't just a matter of negotiating new agreements. The government is also deploying New Zealand's excellent diplomats and New Zealand trade and enterprise staff to ensure that we actually maximise the value of the agreements we already have. Because what we have seen is that when we put a spotlight on market opportunities, doors do open. The New Zealand-UK free trade deal and the early entry into force of the New Zealand-EU trade agreement really illustrate that point. The NZ-UK deal has boosted Kiwi exports to the UK by 21% in just its first 2 years. That's the value of the spotlight. The NZ-EU deal contributed to a 28% increase in goods exports to the EU during its first year. And New Zealand's reputation as an upholder of rules-based trading, I think increasingly in an unstable world, will be a point in our favour. We are recognised as a reliable, trustworthy trading partner that other countries want to do business with. And we're also making a big push to attract more investment into New Zealand. And I'm with all of those in the room who want to see more of our own KiwiSaver funds and savings deployed here, but I'd also like to see them complemented by international capital and talent. Because by international standards, we have relatively low levels of capital intensity, which is correlated with our low rates of productivity. And so we need that international investment, not just for the dollars, but because it brings with it knowledge and expertise that over time uplifts the economy. So one of the first things we did on taking office was direct the Overseas Investment Office to administer that regime in a way that minimises rub and speeds things up. And as a result, the time taken to process applications is more than halved. We're now progressing legislation to make it even simpler. And to further facilitate overseas investment, we've established Invest New Zealand to act as a bridge between offshore investors and local businesses looking for capital. Fourth theme, science, innovation and technology. Kiwi innovators, as you know, have been making their mark on the world since the first shipment of frozen meat left our shores in 1882, which I remind all of those people who tell me that we shouldn't be focusing on the primary industries, we should focus on tech. I say primary industries are the original source of New Zealand tech and will continue to sustain tech into the future. More recently, WetaFX, Rocket Lab, Xero, Holter, agricultural and horticultural scientists have made breakthroughs that have changed the worlds in which they operate. which I was reminded of when I looked upon some golden zespri kiwi fruit in New York recently at Whole Foods, and I can tell you they cost a lot more there. So we need more of that kind of innovation, and that is why we as a government are reorganising our innovation, technology and science system to focus on commercial outcomes that create realisable opportunities for New Zealanders. Those reforms aren't sexy, but they matter. One of the ambitious science programs that we are backing is a project to harness the potential of supercritical geothermal energy. That's energy sourced from the extremely hot rock heated by magma on Taupo's volcanic plateau. At present, conventional geothermal wells are drilled to a maximum depth of about 3.5 kilometres. Scientists think that if we dig deeper to around 6 kilometres, the energy output could be up to 3 times greater than traditional geothermal energy generated from steam. And I tell you that not because you came here for a science lesson, but because there are genuinely things that New Zealand can lead the world in when it comes to science and innovation. Final theme I just want to touch on is infrastructure. My colleague Chris Bishop has been hard at work in this area, and I said to him recently, what's your biggest takeaway point? And this is literally what he said. He's possibly been spending a bit too much time in the world of infrastructure. The underlying institutional settings and policy frameworks of New Zealand's infrastructure system must change. And contrary to popular perceptions, New Zealand spends a lot on infrastructure. We're actually in the top 10% of the OECD for infrastructure investment over the last decade. But the kicker is that we're in the bottom 10% when it comes to getting quality and bang for buck for that spending. Well, why is that? Well, it actually goes all the way back to the planning of those projects, but critically, as I'm sure you can observe, it also is about the consenting and regulatory environment in which infrastructure projects are pursued. We are steadfast in our commitment to replace the Resource Management Act, which we believe has been weaponised against development, progress and infrastructure delivery. I'm always struck by the graph in which you look at when was it that housing affordability in New Zealand really started to go downhill. It correlates with the introduction of the Resource Management Act, and we are going to fix it. The government is also working very hard on ensuring that the money we put to one side for infrastructure actually results in spades in the ground. One of the revelations I learned as Finance Minister is that on average, it's more than 1.5 years between a government allocating funding for infrastructure and it actually getting out the door. And so we have been working to hurry that pipeline up, which is why you've heard about $7 billion worth of construction projects getting underway before Christmas. And we intend for billions more to be coming down the pipeline. So expect to see Chris Bishop, spade in hand, coming to a sod turning near you soon. So having gone through those 5 key themes, let me finish by just saying a little bit about KiwiSaver. I heartily agree with you about the importance of encouraging and helping New Zealanders to save for their retirements. And KiwiSaver as a scheme provides, to my mind, multiple benefits. It helps young Kiwis to learn about the wonders of compound interest. It assists many of those young Kiwis to buy their first homes. About $2 billion was withdrawn from KiwiSaver accounts by first home buyers in the last financial year. KiwiSaver increases the pool of investment funds available to be invested here in New Zealand. The Reserve Bank estimates around 40%, although estimates differ from different sources, of KiwiSaver balances are invested in New Zealand currently, and that's a range of financial products and assets. As we grow our KiwiSaver savings, we will have more capital to deploy in the growth of our country. Of course, most importantly, KiwiSaver supplements the funds older New Zealanders receive from government superannuation, helping them to enjoy more comfortable retirements. And that's why in this year's budget, even amidst the cost of living challenges that we face, we made the decision to increase the default rate of employee and matching employer contributions from 3 to 4% of salaries and wages, 8% all up. The changes are being phased in over 3 years, with the first increase to 3.5% taking place on the 1st of April next year. We've also chosen to change the minimum age for government and matching employer contributions, reducing that from 18 to 16. We want to help young Kiwis develop good savings habits. I know there's other questions about KiwiSaver. I look forward to them very soon. But before we get to that, let me just summarise the picture I have tried to paint for you today, which is that New Zealand has undoubtedly been through a tough time economically. Our government knows many people, many businesses are still doing it tough. But evidence is mounting that we can look forward to better times. But we have to do more than just surf that economic cycle. We need to shift New Zealand onto a faster growth track by taking sincere, substantive reforms that deliver over the longer term. That's why we've embarked on an ambitious program of reform, and it's already showing signs of making a difference with kids in schools, banking sector reforms, increasing the settings for competition, an express lane for new supermarkets in the grocery sector, doors being opened for our exporters, doors to investors, a refocused science system, roads, schools, hospitals getting built. Ultimately, what we are working to do is unlock New Zealand's untapped potential. I've had the good fortune in recent weeks of visiting a number of countries in the world. And it's refreshing, because when we're here, we focus on our problems. And I can tell you, when people look at us from the outside, they see our strengths. We are safe in a world that increasingly worries about invasion on borders and missiles flying overhead. We are of stable institutions and a stable democracy, even so much as my opposition opponents irritate me. We are a country of abundant natural resource, which has a history of achieving and of having smart, capable people. We have a constellation of trade relationships and are well regarded in this world. And it remains the case that if I could choose to raise a family or start a business in any country in the world this decade, there is only one choice: New Zealand. Our best years are ahead of us. You are part of that. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
I'm going to rip straight into KiwiSaver. Very unlike Winston Peters to get a headline. Very unlike him. But you, I'm sure, had a bit of a smile on your face when you saw his suggestion at his party conference, a 10% and 10% contribution rate for KiwiSaver. What do you make of that plan?
Well, the first thing I thought was when he said 8 and 10, I thought, great, he's endorsing the 8 plan, which we've put out as a government. And then I have clarified with him, you're right, that he is talking about 10 and 10. So 10 from employees, 10 from employers. Look, I see the ambition, and I appreciate that the idea of increasing contributions to KiwiSaver over time is a positive one. But my immediate reaction was Australia, who many of us look to as a great example of a compulsory savings regime. They ask Australians, who do already earn a lot more than us and have higher disposable incomes, to contribute 12% to superannuation. So 20% is at the high end.
That's on the employer side, right?
It's all, they call it all employer.
Yep.
But if you talk to the analysts at Treasury, we divide it employee, employer,
Yep.
but ultimately it all falls to employee because ultimately it's a wage sacrifice.
Winston says he would pay for it with tax cuts.
Yeah.
You say that would cost?
Well, if we were to go to the level that he's talking about, that would cost roughly $15 billion a year.
Can we afford $15 billion a year in tax cuts right now?
Well, look, these people are good with numbers, so a couple of contextual numbers. We're spending $20 billion a year on our entire education system, $30 billion a year on health, $30 billion a year over the next few years into superannuation annually. And so that's a lot of money. It's roughly 4 times what we spent on our tax package coming into government. The key thing for me is that at the moment, every New Zealander does make a compulsory contribution to their pension. It's just that we pay it through tax, and that's to fund our universal pension scheme, which the Australians don't have. So I think the real question that we should all be left with is if you're requiring a compulsory contribution to a private scheme while also requiring the level of taxation needed to support a universal scheme. Can you do the both at once? And I'd suggest that ultimately those of us who have to worry about the fiscals would say it probably needs to be a more subtle combination of the two.
Just very quickly, is $15 billion affordable in tax cuts right now?
Not right now, no.
So my tax doesn't go towards my superannuation.
Well,
my tax goes to the superannuation of people who are retiring today, right? Who are 65 today. And the whole tension here is that as we have an ageing population, we have fewer workers for the number of retirees, we're not going to be able to make that work anymore. We're not going to be able to square that circle. Compulsion, what do you think?
Well, look, I just want to address that first point because I think it is one of the political monsters in the room that, you know, I will never forget at the last election, National campaigned on a policy of what I would just call realism, making your point, which is this is getting more and more unaffordable in terms of our demographics. Let's raise our age gradually to 67. And that will make it more affordable. And we faced the most gnarly political campaigning on that I've ever seen, literally robocalls to superannuitants saying, do you know National wants to change the age of eligibility for your super, even though they would never have been impacted on it. So I'm calling at this election for us to have a mature, grown-up conversation about how we deliver New Zealanders' retirement incomes in the future in a way that doesn't sacrifice the investments we can make in the education and health services we provide our kids and young people today.
So one part of that is superannuation, the other part is KiwiSaver. So talk to us about how what you see the political opportunity as being in a cross-party agreement around the settings for KiwiSaver going forward.
Well, look, I would love that. But
I mean, you could drive that.
Can I tell you a story? Because this is a true story. Last year's mood of the boardroom, okay? So that's all of the highfalutin CEOs, some of whom are here today and I like very much. And we're in this mood of the boardroom, we're on stage, we're talking about the big challenges that New Zealand needs to confront. And I turned to the Labour opposition finance spokesperson and I said, I'll tell you one we need to talk about. Let's talk together about superannuation, our scheme, and how we can make it sustainable over time. And she, I think, instinctively and authentically said, I'm up for that, let's do it. Half an hour later, the press release had gone out saying that that was spoken in error and no such conversation would be happening.
So superannuation, though, that's superannuation, KiwiSaver.
The two are intimately related in my mind.
So your view is that the opposition wouldn't be open, and let's just talk about Labour for the time being, wouldn't be open to some sort of a cross-party broad agreement around the future settings to ensure the growth and resilience of KiwiSaver.
Well, I'm not prepared to write them out of that possibility.
But you could drive it, is my point.
I've just shared two anecdotes about why I'm cynical about whether that will occur. But I believe that on these issues, if we can get a consensus that results in enduring change, that is the most stable thing for everyone involved. And certainty in these settings is really important. And for my mind, we have this opportunity, which is that KiwiSaver, this well understood and loved product, can be the vehicle through which we tell the story of how New Zealanders can make their own personal retirement nest egg, and then that allows us to ask questions about what the state provides in the future.
Right, so back to that compulsion question. Can you explain to me, given my taxes today aren't paying for my retirement, they're paying for other people's superannuation, why do you oppose compulsion for KiwiSaver?
Well, Jack, right now, if you were to ask most people in New Zealand what's the number one pressing concern for you, they'd say, my cost of living. And for most families, that would boil down to the fact that their income hasn't risen fast enough to keep up with price increases over recent years, and they feel like they're going backwards. The stark reality for many families is that compelling them to save when actually what they believe they should be doing is paying down their mortgage or frankly paying for the groceries is a difficult conversation unless there's something on the other side of it. And that's why I make the point about compulsory superannuation and the fact that whether or not it's today or tomorrow, the rates of taxation we pay are related to a universal scheme.
You could stagger it though, just as you're changing the contribution
Look,
rate.
as you say, there are lots of options. There are lots of ways of thinking about this and approaching it. And as I say, I believe that this will be a substantive conversation as we lead into the next election. And my view is that no serious political party can go to the next election without a policy on superannuation and KiwiSaver.
Are you considering changes to other settings or changes to incentives that might help to grow KiwiSaver heading into the next election?
Well, I'm considering how do we make sure we achieve three things. One, security in retirement for people in their retirement years. Two, fiscal sustainability, so that we're not just digging ourselves into a debt track. And three, replicating the success that countries around the world have had when we grow our pool of private savings, both for deployment here at home, but also for creating a nest egg for other New Zealanders.
So on that point, I think the insurance sector is one of the largest institutional investors in the country, combined with the KiwiSaver providers, the managed funds. I mean, you said 40% was the number from
That's
the
what the
Reserve
Reserve Bank sees, but I just want to acknowledge there's a range of figures out there, but that's the Reserve Bank's figure.
So are there policy settings that could better harness that pool of long-term capital for New Zealand's infrastructure and productivity needs going forward?
Yeah, this is something I've explored deeply because as we were developing our KiwiSaver policy in this budget, for me it was very aligned with the growth agenda, which is if we deepen that capital pool, we can get more investment in infrastructure and productivity enhancing assets. When we went and talked to fund providers about what's stopping you from investing more in New Zealand assets right now, there are a range of responses, it varies. Fundamentally, many of them said there aren't actually enough assets with the rate of return that we need at the scale we need in New Zealand available over the coming years. And so what they were really asking for was more vehicles for investing in New Zealand assets. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I have been focused on, because there's no question New Zealand has profound infrastructure needs. We have businesses who are undercapitalised who can grow. So the magic piece is how do we connect that to the KiwiSaver capital in a way that KiwiSaver funds are prepared to take it up. And I do also just want to say this, which is New Zealanders are smart. And if the government was to come in and look, I've been tempted and say, you have to invest it in New Zealand, I think many New Zealanders would feel a bit ripped off because they would say, well, that's my money, I'm saving it, and why are you, the government, forcing me to take a lower rate of return or have a riskier profile of investment than I believe is best for me? So that's the other factor we always have to balance here.
A question from Reese. How do you intend to encourage businesses to make investments in their people, not just plant and machinery?
Well, this is a nerdy answer, but that investment boost policy, the thing that really got it across the line for me was the analysis that said the biggest impact this has is when you increase investment in machinery and plant and technology, that is when you get the biggest wage uplifts, because that's when businesses are able to pay people more. And Treasury estimated that of all of the tax reforms they looked at, that was the most likely thing to lead to wage uplift over the forecast period. So I do think that's part of it. But in terms of businesses investing in their people, my experience is any smart business knows if you can't attract talent, retain talent and grow talent, your business ain't growing.
So this time next year, we could be staring down the barrel of an election. We might be in the election period. We may have had one. Who knows? Can you just give me a quick yes or no?
See, always the journalist, right? Just a little bit of mischief making. There won't have been an election by this time next year, Jack.
Do you intend to go to the next election with a new additional superannuation policy, one other than your current raising the age policy?
Always respectful of my caucus, but able to commit that we will go to the next election with a superannuation and savings policy that we believe addresses the challenges which I've outlined to you today.
And that includes KiwiSaver?
KiwiSaver has to be a part of that.
Very good. Please join me in thanking the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis.